And there are really 3 or 4 companies that own our children's childhoods and have complete legal immunity so far and are crushing our kids and know what they're doing and are not taking appropriate steps. Again, it's just insane to let 11-year-olds talk to strangers all around the world and buy drugs from them. If you spend your adolescence on video games and porn, you're going to become a loser. And there is evidence that Instagram is the worst of the worst because even the teens themselves, they say Instagram is unique. This was in Facebook's own internal study. This is from the Facebook files.
I'm Rufus Griscom, and this is The Next Big Idea. Today, the kids are not all right. Jonathan Haidt's new book, The Anxious Generation, begins with a metaphor. Imagine that a visionary billionaire invites your daughter, a bright and cheerful 10-year-old, to join the first human settlement on Mars. Your daughter begs you to let her go. She loves outer space. All her friends will be there. And you don't want to quash her dreams, so you agree to learn more. Here's what you find. She's been recruited because children adapt better to the unusual conditions of Mars. If she grows up and goes through puberty on the red planet, her body will be permanently altered by the low-gravity environment. As a result, your daughter may never be able to return to Earth. So, would you let her go? Of course not. And yet, as John goes on to explain, we have in effect let our children go to Mars. They didn't have to leave the Earth's atmosphere. They didn't even need to leave their rooms. We just gave them smartphones. They signed up for social media with or without our permission. And now these technologies are warping their minds and bodies just like life on Mars would. You may think this sounds outlandish, even ridiculous. Are iPhones and Instagram really that bad? Well, consider these statistics. 1 in 7 American girls spends more than 40 hours a week on social media. 40 hours a week! That's a full-time job. And those heavy users, they're 3 times as likely to be depressed. And it's not just the heavy users. According to the CDC, in 2021, almost 60% of female students experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness during the past year, and nearly 25% made a suicide plan. It's just heartbreaking. The phone-based childhood, as John calls it, is leading to alarming rates of anxiety, sleep deprivation, loneliness, self-harm, and suicidal thoughts for girls and boys. It's changing our children's ability to concentrate, impacting how well they learn, convincing them they need to chase unattainable beauty standards. How did we get here? How did this happen? And what can we do about it? These are some of the questions I put to Jonathan Haidt, a renowned social psychologist now based at NYU, who spent the last several years studying the great rewiring of childhood, the harmful shift in how our kids' brains and social skills develop. He's also been sounding the alarm, urging lawmakers, educators, and parents to come together not only to hold social media platforms accountable, but to make changes at home, at school, and at large that will help kids unplug so they can have the kind of childhoods they deserve. Jonathan Haidt, welcome to The Next Big Idea.
Thank you, Rufus. I love the Next Big Idea Club.
John, I'm so pleased to have you with us today. You've written a book that's the talk of the town, highly relevant to those of us with kids. I have 3 boys, 13, 16, and 19. We don't know how to make girls, but apparently we're good at making boys. And I think it's a book that's frankly also relevant to adults. I mean, it's sometimes easier for us to talk about threats to our children than threats to all of us, to our society more broadly. So we'll get to that. But I think I should start by congratulating you. Wow, The Anxious Generation has been on the New York Times bestseller list now for months, right? It's
6 months.
For 6 months, astounding. And this is not the first book of yours that's had a big impact. You wrote The Happiness Hypothesis and The Righteous Mind, and then The Coddling of the American Mind, which made some waves. You have been in my mind someone who is usually taking the contrarian position. Mm-hmm. And this time it seems to me that you're in the fast-moving center of mainstream opinion. I don't know if that's
it's so much nicer. Oh my God. Yes. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
absolutely true because I mean, what I am is I feel like I'm a liberal. That is, in the liberal tradition, someone who loves universities, ideas, free speech, a free society, liberal democracy. And I've watched over the past 15 or so years as illiberalism has gotten much, much more radical. It's taken over the Republican Party, and it's taken over not the Democratic Party, but it's taken over certain institutions, particularly universities. And so that's why it might seem to you that I'm a contrarian, because I've been working on that since about 2015, and that was the Coddling the American Mind book. And so, yes, I'm used to people assuming I'm a conservative or assuming I'm whatever it is they hate, and this is totally different. On this one, it seems that almost every parent has seen what a phone-based life is doing to their kids. Almost every teacher has seen it. Everyone was ready for change. There was just a lot of confusion, especially in the wake of COVID, just a lot of confusion about what exactly is happening. What exactly do we do about it? So I'm stunned by the success of the book in that, I knew it would do well. I knew that a lot of people wanted to read it, but what it really shows is that around the world, and it's not just here, around the world, family life has become a fight over screen time, and everyone hates it.
Yeah.
And that's what I think my book was tapping into.
Yep. Okay. So you'd say that you're not inherently a contrarian. You're not unsettled by having most people agree with you. You're quite happy
I'm
with it.
really enjoying it. I've never had it before, but now I'm really enjoying it. I'm not controversial at all for the first time.
Right. Interesting. So it's I imagine somewhat therapeutic, because I also think of you as having historically spoken out against moral outrage. And I hear you saying in the Anxious Generation that in this case, maybe moral outrage is appropriate, but we have multi-trillion-dollar tech companies making billions of dollars in ad revenue while driving our children into a state of despair. Would you say there's a time and a place for moral outrage, and this is one of them?
Well, perhaps you're reading between the lines, but one thing I think, yes, it is characteristic of all of my work that I quote, I quote Sensan, the Buddhist monk, Sensan. He says, "If you wish to see the truth, then hold no opinions for or against anything. To set up what you like against what you dislike is the disease of the mind." And what I found ever since I first, I was always on the left and I was trying to understand conservatives to write The Righteous Mind. And what I discovered is that any sort of anger or hostility, it funnels and narrows your thinking towards the desired conclusion. And that's fine if you're going into war, but if you're an academic, if you're a researcher, if you're trying to understand something for real, you have to dispense with all of that. You really can't go into it angry. And so I do generally warn people about anger. And so I hope in the Anxious Generation, I hope I'm not whipping up outrage. I really, I do say, yes, the business model is, what's driving these companies to harm our kids. Maybe you can call that a call to outrage, but I thought it was pretty tame.
Right. Although I guess some would say that there's an argument that there's a time and a place if we're trying to change legislation, and we'll get to this later in the conversation about what we can do to change the dynamics of
I agree. I agree. No, there's a role for activists. I'm not an activist, but there's a role for activists who channel the anger.
Right.
And I think there are now multiple groups of parents, mostly mothers, whose kids are dead largely from suicide, self-harm, eating disorder, anorexia. And they are a powerful witness. There's a very strong role for emotions in this because this is real kids we're talking about. And it's not just, a few dozen kids. I mean, it's hundreds of deaths and literally millions of lives that are diminished, I would say.
Yeah. Well, let's get to the core argument of the book. You begin it with a chart, I think 3 pages in, that shows this extraordinary increase in major depression among teenagers, up about 150% since 2010. In the case of girls, the incidence of major depressive episodes in the last year is almost 30%, which is just astounding to me. What's going on?
Yeah. So that's the big puzzle. why was it that mental health stats, when you graph out rates of anxiety, depression, self-harm, they were very stable from the late 90s all the way through 2010, even 2011. There's no sign of a problem, no sign of a trend. And all of a sudden, 2012, it's like someone flipped a light switch and all of those lines start going up around 2012, 2013. And it's the curves are usually sharper for girls. So boys are doing very badly too. We'll get to the boys, I hope. But for the girls, it's very, very sudden. 2011, no sign of a problem. 2013, 2014, problems everywhere. And it was when I discovered that it wasn't just us, that it was the same in the UK, same in Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So I have data from all those countries in the books and on my Substack. It's also in Scandinavia. It tends to be, especially in the freest countries, in the places where kids are not anchored or rooted. So in Eastern Europe, you don't get that, but that's a part of the world that's getting more religious. What I'm arguing is that the great rewiring of childhood, which happened between 2010 and 2015, it was like a tsunami that came sweeping in, and any kids that weren't rooted, that weren't tied down to family or religion, they got swept out to sea. And now most of them are doing badly. Most of the secular liberal kids are doing, well, I should say secular liberal girls. The majority of them have poor mental health. The boys, it's a little lower than that, a little less than half.
Wow. And the specificity of this time horizon where this kicks in is very important, I think, to the argument. I mean, because by some measures, there's some challenges that American children have been having that has increased over a period of decades. But we do see something very specific, right, that happened right around in this 2010 to 2015 period, as you say, which is we know that, Apple launched the iPhone in 2007, but it wasn't until 2010 that we had the iPhone 4 with front-facing cameras and Instagram launches, right? And I think it wasn't until 2015 that smartphone adoptions and social media use exceeds 75% of U.S. households. So it was a very critical 5-year period.
Let me trace this out a little bit more precisely. Because sure, the iPhone comes out in 2007, but very few teens have one. And the original iPhone is not at all harmful. It's a tool that you use. It's a digital Swiss Army knife. And if it had stayed that, we wouldn't have had this problem. But then you get the App Store, you get push notifications. So now the iPhone is able, by 2010, the iPhone is really able to take over your life, whereas it couldn't do that in 2007, 2008. 2010 is when we get the front-facing camera. It's when Instagram comes out. Although teens aren't really on Instagram in large numbers, it's a photography site until 2012. 2012 is the year that Facebook buys Instagram. They don't change it, but that's the year of the great blow-up. And that's also coincidentally the year when we cross 50% of American homes having someone with a smartphone. So it really is this very narrow period, 2010 to 2015. And that's really the crux of the book, that the millennial generation, their mental health is fine, they're creative, they found companies, they take risks, they travel the world. The millennial generation is an amazing generation, born 1981 through 1995. They basically finished puberty with their flip phones. And it was like on the day they finished, the last of them finished puberty and kind of closed the door, everyone in puberty was then Gen Z. And they went through puberty on a smartphone and social media. So that's my argument. Obviously, there's a couple-year transition in there. But if you were born in the early 90s, you finished puberty before everything became phones and Instagram. Whereas if you were born, say, in 1998, just a few years later, by the time you are starting puberty, you're on a phone. And that has devastating consequences for girls. Middle school is so hard for girls as it is, harder for girls than boys. Their bodies are changing, the bullying, the mean girl phenomenon is just so terrible in middle school for girls. And and you throw social media into the mix, now they can never get away from it. Now they can be bullied and tortured all weekend long, all night long. So anyway, that's my argument, that is the only thing I can think of. I've not found any other theory that can explain why it happened, not just in the US, but in so many other countries at the exact same time. Many people say, oh, well, obviously, it was the school shootings, the Newtown massacre, that was 2012. And kids since then have had, all these lockdown drills. Of course they're anxious. Like, no, that does not explain why girls in New Zealand and Australia began checking into psychiatric emergency wards in 2012, 2013. So there is no other theory. This one fits. We can't do experiments on the past. We can't run experiments to see what caused historical trend. But we can do experiments on the present, and the experiments are increasingly showing, and there's a big debate going on right now, this week, but the experiments are increasingly showing that if you get people off, if you experimentally assign young people to reduce their social media use for at least 2 weeks, they get happier. So the correlational evidence, the experimental evidence, the eyewitness testimony, I think it's really all making a strong case by now.
Yeah. And as you point out, this is true for kids who are going off of social media while their friends are still on social media. I mean, a case where you take an entire community off of social media is arguably, and the effect would be even more profound.
Exactly. And this is a point, you're one of the only people who's ever brought this up, because this is one of the most important points, and it's the other, I'll say, crux of the book. There are a couple of key points in the book. But one, because I'm a social psychologist, what I brought to this was a real sensitivity to social norms and the way that when everybody is on it, that puts pressure on everybody else to be on it. And so if you're the one girl who says, no, I quit, will that make you happier? Well, even if social media is devastating all the other girls, if you quit, you're now alone. Yet even still,
wow,
you'll be less miserable. And so, yes, the exact right experiment is one in which we randomly assign, let's say middle schools. I think we'd see the biggest effect in middle school. If we could, and I've been pushing for this, I can't get any state to do this. But if you could randomly assign middle schools, let's say you have, so Utah or Arkansas or California, New York, there's a lot, Virginia, there's a lot of states that are, the governors are really working on this. If they could say, let's find, 30 middle schools and that are willing to participate, and half of them are going to randomly assign, half of them are going to go phone free this year, and half won't go phone free for another year. And let's see what happens. And I can tell you what happens every time a school goes phone free. Now, this isn't getting them off social media. This is just giving them 6 hours a day of phone free time.
Right.
Every school that does this, they say the same thing. We hear laughter in the hallways again. It's uncanny the way they always say that. It's the hallways and the lunchroom. They say we hear kids laughing in lunch. Lunch is much louder than it used to be, because since 2015, lunchtime and time between classes is time checking your phone. It's not time talking and joking and laughing and getting into mischief and flirting.
My 16-year-old son, when he was 13, went to a summer camp and surrendered his smartphone for
How
a
was
month.
that?
And of course, he was appalled initially, but he came back, and one of his first comments was, I realized I'm happier without my phone.
Yeah.
And he chose to keep his phone turned off for about 3 days.
Right. And then, I've heard the story 100 times.
Right,
yes.
Right.
That's right.
And what's great about the summer camp model is that it's not just 6 hours, it's 24 hours a day.
Yes, and it's with other kids.
Which means that you sleep better, right? I mean, the impact on sleep is a factor.
That's right. That's right. There's a day you're spending more time outside. One of the things that the phone-based life has pushed out is time in nature and sunlight. Kids are getting less sunlight. Around the world, eyeballs are getting longer. Myopia. There's an article in this, on The Economist on this. Around the world, there's a myopia epidemic because kids are spending so much time in close quarters with screens. They're not getting the long views. They're not getting sunlight. They're not getting outdoors. So if you can imagine a childhood where you take out most of the outdoor time, most of the sunlight, most of the time putting your arm around another kid or touching another kid in any way, wrestling, hugging, sharing a laugh with another kid, take out most of that. Once you give your kid a smartphone and social media, it is going to expand to fill not just every available moment. It's going to keep pushing so that it takes more than every available moment. Literally half of our kids say in surveys that they are online almost all the time. Meaning even at meal times, even in the bus, even in the bathroom. I hear that now that the iPhone is waterproof, some kids are taking it into the shower with them. It gloms onto it. Your bones grow around. Actually, your bones literally grow around it. There's a thing on trending if you just look up phone pinky. So many young people are discovering that their left pinky bends. It bends to the inside, not their right pinky, because they've had the phone cradled there so much. And as their bones are growing over the course of puberty, their bones literally are growing around the phone on the left hand only, not the right hand.
Oh my gosh. I
So just imagine what it's doing to the brain.
I guess I'm out of it. Yeah.
No, it shouldn't. You should be fine because your pinky was done.
Right. Exactly. No, and right, and this is another one of your core arguments that that these are that our children, our young tweens and teens have brains in development, and so the consequences. I mean, not only do they not have prefrontal cortexes that are fully formed that can enable them to. It's harder for them to resist the siren call of the phone, but this is also potentially permanently impacting their development.
That's right. I do suspect that the impact will be permanent in this sense. So to be clear, the brain is still fairly plastic and the frontal cortex is still somewhat plastic all the way through the mid-20s. And, so if you're a college student, you still can make big changes that will have a lasting impact. But I'm beginning to compile evidence about the way that Gen Z is different from previous generations. It's not just this. It's not just the mental health. So far more anxious, depressed, suicidal. Especially the girls are at record levels, never seen before, and self-harming. Those are all way up. And I think even 30 years from now, we're going to find that Gen Z has higher levels of depression than any previous generation at that age. But it's not just the mental health. It's also education. Test scores have been dropping, not since COVID, since 2012. Test scores in the U.S. have been rising slowly, steadily since the 70s. We were making some progress in getting kids more educated, and that reversed in 2012. People see the data and they say, wow, look what COVID did. But the drop didn't begin in 2020, it began in 2012. And that's the U.S. The PISA data set, this one international data set on education, shows that this happened all over the world. So the human species is getting less educated, less intelligent since 2012. Is this going to have a permanent effect on us, on society, on the economy? How could it not? If we have less human capital, we have literally less human capital, literally less human potential in Gen Z, because all of the things that one should be doing in childhood to help your brain develop, you get rid of most of that and you replace it with 5 hours, that's the average, 5 hours of social media, mostly consuming short videos. Yes, I think it's going to have permanent effects on Gen Z, and we have to stop it now so that Gen Alpha doesn't suffer the same fate. Of course, there's a lot my kids are Gen Z, your kids are Gen Z. I'm not saying let's give up on them. But I'm saying by far the biggest bang for the buck, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And protecting Gen Alpha is so easy. It doesn't cost any money. We could do it tomorrow. We've got to do it. Whereas improving the mental health of Gen Z, we can do, but it's really hard and expensive.
And so I very much wish that I had read The Anxious Generation a decade ago.
Yeah, me too.
Right. I mean, we had, because my wife and I are both digital entrepreneurs, we sort of erred on the side of a parenting strategy that we refer to jokingly as benign neglect. Part of which you would support, I think, when it comes to giving kids freedom.
Yes, let's come back to that.
But we've had a bit of a view that like, hey, the digital world is part of our modern world, and getting to know it is I mean, they will work in the digital space most likely, and that there are advantages to being a native. But this is one of I always look, John, I look forward to the opportunity to say I was wrong about this, and I've started to keep track of everything that I'm wrong about, and I do feel you have convinced me that I was 100% wrong about this.
Yeah, we were all wrong.
But are there things you would have done differently in the raising of your children had you done this research a decade earlier?
Oh my God, absolutely. So first let's run through how it is that you were fooled, I was fooled, we were all fooled, because your decisions that you made 10 years ago were perfectly reasonable and rational. So here's how it went. You have to put yourself back in the 90s. You and I think I'm a little older than you, but I'm sure you remember when the internet came out in the early 90s. Do you remember when you first saw a web browser? I mean, it was like
Mosaic. It was beautiful.
Yeah, Mosaic, Alta Vista. That's right. And so it was as though God came down and said, "Do you want omniscience? Do you want to know everything instantly?" I mean, kings would have given a king's ransom for all of history to have that. And we were just given it for free. And it was marvelous. Yeah. And the millennials were the first generation who grew up with it. And they came out great. They learned to program. They learned how to take apart computers and build them. They started tech companies, including some bad ones, but a lot of good ones. And so we all thought like, hey, computers are the way of the future. The internet's amazing. We thought the internet is the best friend of democracy. And this was the 90s, of course. So triumph of democracy, end of history. There's no way China can keep out the internet. So we were all incredible techno-optimists. I certainly was. And there was a great book, Non-Zero by Robert Wright, just about, increasing levels of cooperation, communication. So the basic idea of that is probably right. And that's why we were all optimists all the way. And then we get the iPhone, which is the most miraculous device ever. And we get apps like Uber. Like, really? I press a button, a taxi comes to me? Food comes to me? I mean, we just godlike powers. And again, the millennials who grew up with it, they were fine. So in 2010, we all thought this is fine. And even in 2015, we all still thought, well, this is still fine. But things were beginning to turn. Mental health was beginning to tank. Our kids, because on the old internet, you couldn't spend 16 hours a day because it was on your parents' computer. And you couldn't take your parents' computer into the bathroom. You couldn't take it to school. But by 2015, everyone has their own supercomputer in their pocket. You can talk to strangers, watch videos. Companies can reach you. Men can reach you. So growing up in 2015 with a phone-based childhood was just radically different, radically unhealthy, radically inhuman. But it took us a while to realize that. So yeah, you were wrong. We were all wrong. We were all wrong to be techno-optimists because tools and innovations that are amazing for adults to help us achieve our ends quickly and easily with no effort, that's great. But the last thing you want for your kids is from the time they're little to say, how about if you can achieve everything with no effort? How about you go through childhood with no effort? Oh, you're feeling a little bit awkward in the lunchroom? Oh, just pull out your phone. You don't need to talk to anyone. Just pull out your phone. That's what kids tell me. They say, in the lunchroom, a lot of kids are just on their phone. And if they didn't have their phone, they'd feel awkward. Yes, they'd feel awkward. And then they would talk to someone. So yeah, we blew it. We blew it. And now we have to make up. So the phone-based childhood is only 12 years old. I hear this all the time. Well, the genie's out of the bottle. Oh God, the worst argument I ever heard. A woman, a parenting expert, she said, we have to raise our kids in the world that we have, not the world that we wish we had. And I said, no way. The world that we have is only 12 years old. It's horrible. It's causing an entire generation to be diminished, less educated, more mentally ill. So no, I don't accept it. We're going to change it. And we are changing it.
Yeah. Now let's take a moment to address, let me say that again. Let's take a moment to address your critics because you have
let's take more than critics.
A moment. As comfortable as you are with a lot of people agreeing with you right now, there are at least a handful who don't agree with you.
Yes.
And they have a few arguments that they're pretty passionate about that make the case that you have the wrong. Yeah. So let's start with, of course, teens are depressed. Look at the state of the world. The world is on fire.
Right. Okay. So if this all broke out in the last few years, I would say, yeah, that could be. But this all broke out in the second term of Obama. Now, was that term so much worse than the first term? The first term, we had the financial crisis. Why is it that it all goes south all over the world in the early 2010s? It just doesn't make sense. Now, if it was 2018, I would say, oh, well, maybe, Greta Thunberg, she caused a sort of global rise in consciousness, and especially in girls. So maybe that would fit. But it wasn't 2018. No. It was 2012, 2013. So that argument just doesn't work. Oh, also another. Youth mental health is pretty much unrelated to political and social events. We don't get depressed because there are wars and problems. In fact, war tends to energize people. They tend to come together. They have a tremendous sense of meaning. Previous generations, when faced with external threats, they come together. They actually have an increase in sense of meaning. When kids are depressed, it's not because the world is bad. It's because they feel alone and isolated. That's what causes depression. So I just don't buy it. I don't see any evidence
maybe these
that it's because
things
of the state
feed
of the
one
world.
another. I remember seeing this data point that 36% of Gen Zers say they're hesitant about having children because of global warming. Which
right.
I just thought, good God, that's such a fatalistic, depressive kind of mindset. But you would say it's not the global warming that that is causing that mindset. It's something.
That's right.
It's
So
the
why
social media?
So there was a rise of concern about the environment in the 70s. There was another one in the 90s with global warming. And then there's another one in the 2010s. The difference, I believe, is that until 2015, middle school kids were not marinating in each other's thoughts about global warming. They were marinating in each other's thoughts about each other. That's normal. When you connect prepubescent kids to the internet and now everybody is marinating. Actually, it's not everybody. It's especially girls on the left. Girls on the left, they use social media more. They tend to have a lot more of the content about everything is oppression. As a woman, as a girl, you'll never get ahead. They marinate in these beliefs. And that, I think, might explain why the sharpest curves are generally for girls on the left.
Interesting. A second response from your critics is that you have correlation and causation mixed up.
Yep.
You're familiar, of course, with the work of Amy Orban and Andrew Shabilsky, researchers at Cambridge and Oxford, who studied teenage mental health extensively and found, quote, in most groups, more time on social media doesn't mean life satisfaction will decrease. Their research shows the opposite is true. Decreasing life satisfaction drives an increase in social media use. And they even go on to say that lower life satisfaction correlates more strongly with wearing glasses than with smartphone usage. So what do you say to them?
So that's the famous potato study where they say it's no more harmful than eating potatoes. That is the ultimate blender study. This is what I've come to see. I've gone through a lot of these studies. A blender study, you know how like if you want to get your kids to eat vegetables, you put the vegetables in and then they get blended, you can't see them anymore. So in almost all of these studies, and we've got the data for the Orban and Shabilsky study, in almost all of these studies, there's a clear signal. If you just look at girls and social media and anxiety, depression as the outcome, you almost always find that link, whether it's a correlational study or an experimental study. But what they do, and the Orban and Shabilsky does it the most, is they say, let's look at boys and girls combined, which reduces the effect for girls. Let's look not just at social media. Let's look at all digital activities, including owning a computer. One of the variables on the input side was owning a computer, yes or no. So you greatly expand. You take all kinds of activities, blend them all together. Boys and girls, blend them all together. Lots and lots of outcomes. They had one survey. It had 34 questions on it, most of which had nothing to do with mental health, but they put all of that in. And you blend it all together and you get nothing. Jean Twenge and I went back to the original data sets. They were using 3 large public data sets. We got their exact computer code. They put it online. We got their exact computer code. And when we correct for those errors, when we say, let's just look at girls, let's just look at social media, let's just look at anxiety, depression, we get a correlation much, much larger, equivalent to a correlation coefficient of around 0.2, which is about as large as things get in public health. When you have poor measurement of the variables, you can't get very high correlations. What you're looking for is any signal. And in this case, the signal that comes through over and over again is that if you look at the heavy users and you compare them to the light users, you look at the odds ratio. How many times more likely is it that they're depressed? And what you find is for girls, it's 3-to-1. Heavy users are 3 times as depressed as light users. So that's just one study. That's the ultimate blender study. I'm just in the middle of a debate now. Correlation versus causation. There are a lot of experiments. And guess what? They actually show that if you get off social media for 2 weeks or longer, you get happier. And these are people who are getting off by themselves, not with friends. But it's a blender study. This meta-analysis by Chris Ferguson, what he did was he took all the studies where they took people off for 1 day. 1 day. If you're addicted to something, you get off for 1 day, you're not happy. If you quit heroin, is that going to make you happier? For the next few days, you're going to be completely miserable. It takes weeks to get over withdrawal effects. So what Ferguson did was he combined, there were about 8 or 9 studies that were a 1-day abstinence, and they all showed discomfort. They all showed negative effects. And there were about 10 or 11, I think, that were a week or longer. And almost all of them, with one exception, almost all of them showed that people got happier. So he just blended them together And he concluded, oh, look, on average, there's no effect. So this is what we find over and over again, these blender studies. And so, yes, I have some critics. There are about 6 to 8 researchers that do blender studies. And they say, when you mix everything together, we get nothing. And Zach Rausch and I say, fine, let's look at let's look at the things you blended together. If we look at social media for girls and anxiety, depression, we always find it.
Interesting. Yeah. And part of what you say, I think, is that, look, no one can argue that there wasn't a dramatic negative impact on kids starting in the 2010 to 2015 zone. What else can explain? How else can we explain this shift, right? And I think you would argue that the great rewiring, that attributing this to smartphones and social media is the strongest explanation that is available. And have you heard any other compelling arguments?
I really haven't. So first, you'd be surprised that there are still skeptics who say that it isn't even happening. We have a whole bunch of blog posts at afterbabble.com because some people say, oh, well, Obamacare changed the definition, it changed insurance reimbursement. So of course, they're reporting a lot more in 2012 because that's when Obamacare changed. Well, okay, that would be plausible, except that why did that happen in Britain and Australia and New Zealand at the same time? So there are some skeptics out there who are so skeptical, they don't even think there's a mental health crisis. They're not convinced of that. I mean, the level of skepticism that I'm dealing with is like what I first encountered in my introduction to philosophy class my freshman year. Descartes saying, how do we know we exist? We could be just, a phantasmagoria created by a demon. Like, how can we be 100% certain that we exist? That's kind of what we're facing here. We've got people out there saying, we can't even be certain that there's a mental health crisis. Really? Talk to the heads of almost every school, K-12 or university. Mental health crisis is one of their top concerns. So there's skepticism even about that. But Zach Rausch and I have addressed all of that. Go to afterbabble.com. And then you ask, are there other stories? Oh, the other one that's commonly used is the global financial crisis. Maybe that explains why it was global. But as Jean Twenge first showed, and I show it in the book too, the timing is all wrong. That hits with tremendous force in 2008, 2009. Lots of parents are unemployed, lots of stress for families, 2008, 2009. What happens to teen mental health? Nothing. Totally fine. No change. The economy begins to recover during the second Obama term. What happens to teen mental health? As the economy gets better and better, teen mental health goes down and down and down. Now, one didn't cause the other. They're not related. My point is, it's very hard to make the case that the global financial crisis caused this delayed increase, especially in girls, with the biggest effect on younger teen girls. I just don't think that they were as clued into the economy as older kids.
Yeah. It's the one objection from critics that resonates for me a little bit is this view that we've always feared the new.
That's the best argument.
We used to think like Dungeons and Dragons was destroying our children when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, right? And you remember that. And then television was, melting our minds. And we just had a conversation last week with Malcolm Gladwell, we were sort of waxing nostalgic about the way that mass television, 3 networks kind of pulled us together and gave us a sense of common identity. And so a lot of these things that initially looked like they were destroying our civilization and destroying our mental health, decades later seem a lot more innocuous. Stephen Johnson had this great riff at Everything Bad is Good for You that if the book were invented today, people would say, this is horrible. Kids are isolated. They're all by themselves for long periods of time. It's not interactive. It doesn't adapt to the right. So I am given pause by that cycle that we see in our history. Yeah.
No, you're right. That is the best argument against me. Now, it's not a decisive argument. It's more of an opening argument. So coming into this looks structurally like every previous moral panic. So I grant that. And all along, I've always made that clear. Like the burden of proof is on me to show that this time is different because we've been through this many times before. So a couple of points. The first is that this time is different because this is not media driven. Any report about Dungeons and Dragons or comic books, it was not that we all saw our kids descending into insanity. It's that we read an article somewhere about a kid who played Dungeons and Dragons and then killed his mother. And it probably never happened, or if it happened, it was once. So past ones were fueled by media stories that were usually not true. This one is fueled by, or the passion on this one is fueled by, as you told me at the start of this, and as I've hear over and over again from journalists, I see it in my own kids, I see it in my friends' kids. We all see it. This is all around it. This is not a figment of our imagination. Another big difference in the Dungeons and Dragons or comic books, moral panics, the kids were not saying, "Oh my God, if only we could stop reading comic books. Please, please save us from comic books." But Gen Z, ask Gen Z, especially older Gen Z, ask them about social media. Are they grateful for it? No. I just had a study. Sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, I'll pick that up again. So I just had an article in the New York Times with the CEO of the Harris poll. And what we did a survey in which we asked members of Gen Z, these are 18 to 28 years old, and we said, part of the survey was, I wish, do you agree or disagree with these questions? I wish that social media was never invented. I wish that the internet was never invented. I wish that the iPhone was never invented. And what you find is that you find pretty low levels of regret for the internet and the smartphone and YouTube. So young people, they're pretty grateful for the internet and connectivity. I mean, those aren't the problem. For Instagram, those were all like around 15 to 18% regret. For Instagram, it was 35%, much higher. And for TikTok, it was 47%. 47% of Gen Z, these are almost all kids who use it or used it. Yeah. They say the world would have been a better place if it was never invented, because it's a trap. It's a trap. It's hard for them to get off. They recognize that it's wasting their time. They recognize that it's warping their development. So just given the level of regret from the kids using it, this has not happened in any of these previous technology panics.
Yeah. Let's talk about the difference between girls and boys and how they've been affected. As we mentioned earlier, I think it's almost 30% of girls are reporting a major depressive episode in the last year. The level for boys, I think, is a little less than half that. Right. Why is it so different?
Yeah, so the girl story and the boy story are very different stories. The girl story is really focused on or centered around social media. So also, we haven't mentioned much of is the central story of the book is not just about phones. It's about the great rewiring of childhood from what used to be a play-based childhood, which is mentally healthy, and girls and boys play in different ways, to a phone-based childhood, which is incredibly unhealthy, and girls and boys use their phones in different ways. Now, they're all doing bad. I mean, both sexes are doing very, very badly. But the girl story, you can really focus it in on social media. That's where the evidence is strongest. The evidence of social media harming boys' mental health is not nearly as clear or as strong. So for girls, the way to think about it is, if you're a company that is in the business of selling advertisements and you want to capture a population, you want to set a trap. And a trap, the definition of a trap is you have to have an attractive bait that will be attractive to the animal, not to you, but to the animal. And then once the animal grabs that, then something about grabbing it means they can't escape. That's what a trap is. So if you want to trap girls, what would you give them? You wouldn't show them naked boys. That's not what they're interested in. You would show them information about who said what about whom. Girls are much more interested than boys in the social map. They have a much more elaborate, detailed social map of social space. They're very attentive to who's up, who's down, who's fighting with whom, who's friends with whom, who just made up with whom. So if you want to trap girls, just say, hey, do you want to see what someone just said about you? Hey, do you want to see this photograph? So Instagram in particular was just catnip for girls. And then once they go in 2012, they can't get out. Because once everyone's in, you're choosing isolation if you get out. And a middle school kid, a high school kid, that would really be death. So Instagram did a great job of trapping girls. And there is evidence that Instagram is the worst of the worst, because even the teens themselves, they say Instagram is unique. This was in Facebook's own internal study. This is from the Facebook files. The girls pointed to Instagram as being uniquely bad, worse than other platforms. So the girls' story is especially a social media story. The boys' story is very different. Boys. So
and wait, before we. Sorry,
no, please,
John.
go ahead.
Before we jump to the boys, we have a clip here from a song by Olivia Rodrigo called "Jealousy."
Oh, please!
Jealousy.
Oh my God, I love this song. Please, I know what it is.
So she goes on to say, "I want to be you so bad. All I see is what I should be."
That's right.
It's powerful.
That's right. So when we talk about evidence, and my critics say, "Oh, it's just correlation. I have no evidence." Direct eyewitness testimony from the girls, I think, is pretty damning evidence. The fact that the girls say this in surveys, and girls are more likely to wish that these things hadn't been invented than boys. The fact that the girls are writing songs about this, I challenge anyone to find girls writing songs celebrating social media. I challenge anyone to find essays by Gen Z defending. Here we are, we're all talking about limiting phones, getting them out of school, raising the age. Can anyone find Gen Z writing thoughtful, passionate essays about, no, we need this stuff, it's good for us? I've looked, I can't find it.
Yeah.
Whereas essays about how it destroyed me, it ruined me, I wish I didn't have it, I wish my parents had waited, those are all over the internet. So I think that's a kind of evidence.
Yeah. And what she's describing in that song is social comparison, right? Is comparing oneself to the girls in the feed. And you said at one point, girls in virtual networks are subjected to hundreds of times more social comparison than they have for all of human evolution.
That's right.
So it's not that social comparison doesn't exist in the non-digital, in the real world. It's just more that this is just ramped up to a degree that's irresistible to young girls.
That's right. So a metaphor here is, sweets have existed for a long time. There's been fruit for millions of years, and then people found ways to concentrate fruit. So there's been candy and things for thousands of years, as long as there's civilization. But a world that has candy in it is very different from a world that's made of candy, and beginning in the 60s, 70s with the consumer revolution, junk food everywhere, we start getting fat because sweet, appetizing, salty, fatty food is everywhere. It's all around us. You can't keep kids away from it unless you keep them locked up. So there's a difference between saying, we're used to sweets versus the world is made of sweets. In the same way, as long as there have been 2 people or 3 people in a tribe, in a group, they were aware of how they stacked up in the eyes of the others against the others. So there's what's called the sociometer from a social psychologist. It refers to your sort of internal gauge of how high and low you are in the group. And since humans lived in groups of around 50 plus or minus, or there's the Dunbar number, whatever it is, just relatively small groups. And so you're aware of your status and boys' status and girls' status in different hierarchies. So we have all kinds of evolved software to deal with that and to try to get more status. And so you can imagine, one of your rivals does something good or looks particularly beautiful. That's going to cause negative feelings in you that one time that day. Well, imagine if instead of that one time that day, it's 1,000 times that day. It's like the world is made of candy. The world is made of social comparison. And the chorus of that song, if I remember it correctly, it's co-comparison is killing me softly. I think too much about girls that don't know me. Something like that.
Yeah.
And so when an adolescent's world is made of social comparison, that's tragic.
Yeah. Yeah. Comparison is the thief of joy, and magnified by 1,000, it's utterly devastating. And so boys, the boys' story is somewhat more complicated.
That's right.
And it took you a little longer to sort of figure out what was going on with boys. Where did you land on boys?
Yeah. So with boys, I kind of thought, well, it's probably going to be the same thing, but about video games. And video games are very important, and they are hurting a lot of boys, but not most boys, but they are hurting a lot. But it turns out it's just a very different story. And here, the credit really goes to Zach Rausch, my research assistant originally, and now my research partner. I put him on the task. He's a 29-year-old, late millennial. And had him review all the published research we could find on boys. Oh, and by the way, we have enormous numbers of Google documents full of studies organized by type. And so Zach created one for boys. If you go to anxiousgeneration.com/reviews, you can find all these documents. So Zach, we put everything together there about what we knew about, gambling, dating apps, video games, everything, pornography. And then the other piece of this was from Richard Reeves, who wrote the book Of Boys and Men. He's a friend of mine. We collaborated on a book about John Stuart Mill some years ago. And Richard shows that boys have been withdrawing from the real world since the 70s. It used to be a man's world, but beginning in the 70s, women are rising and rising. Women equal men in college by the early 80s, and by 1990, college is mostly female. Now college is 60% female, 59% female. Yeah. So boys have been dropping out steadily. Why? Well, one reason is they're kind of pushed out of the real world because school is really set up for girls. School doesn't match the way boys want to be and learn. They want to run around. They want more recess. We keep saying less recess, sit in your chair. So boys are being pushed out of the real world. We're saying, you don't matter. You're an oppressor. You're bad. I mean, in a whole bunch of ways, we're giving boys the signal, sit down and shut up. And they hate that. But at the same time, the online world is saying, hey, come over here. We've got amazing stuff for you. You want to see naked girls? Oh, we got that covered. We're all about naked girls. You want war? Boys love war. You want war games? You want sports games? Do you want video games? So boys, teenage boys are very, the testosterone is surging, and that really motivates them towards sex and coalitional aggression. They don't want to go punch people, but they do want to be part of a team fighting another team. That's incredibly exciting to young men. So if you want to build a trap for boys, what you do is you say, hey, do you want to see naked girls all day long having sex? Do you want to be a part of a team fighting with really cool weapons against another team of boys? Come this way. And they do. I mean, my son played Fortnite. I kept him off it in 6th and 7th grade, but I did let him on just before COVID, fortunately. And so video games and what's coming, of course, is, AI girlfriends are already here. Porn through goggles is going to be 3-dimensional and really intense. So boys are just leaving the real world behind where they don't have much success, and they're spending their childhood in the virtual world. And so what I've come to realize only after I finished the book is if we check in on kids at the age of 14, it's really clear that the girls are doing worse. The girls are a mess. A third of them, as you said, have had a depressive episode. A quarter of them have made a suicide plan. This is CDC data. A quarter of American teen girls have made a specific suicide plan, thinking, if I were to, here's how I would do it. And that is, it's more than doubled since the early 2000s. So the girls are a mess. The boys are spending hours of every day on video games and porn, and it's fun. They're enjoying that. So the boys don't seem so bad. Now, a lot are depressed. They're very lonely because the virtual connections, especially with porn, they're not satisfying. So the boys are lonely, but they're not as depressed and anxious as the girls. But what I finally realized, if we check in on them at the age of 28, which is what the oldest Gen Z are right now, the girls are doing much better than the boys. Because the girls were more likely to have gone to college, to have graduated from college, to have gotten a job, to be self-supporting. And the boys are more likely than the girls to still be living at home on their parents' couch, no means of support. They've turned themselves into losers. If you spend your adolescence on video games and porn, you're going to become a loser, most likely.
Yeah. It's interesting. Well, I consider myself to be somewhat of an expert on video games, not because I play them, which I don't, but because, as I mentioned earlier, we have three boys, and I'm reminded of this great line from Stuart Brand when in 1972 he encountered the first programmers playing one of the first video games. I think it was called Space War, and he said. And they were shrieking and laughing and screaming with joy. And he said, "I didn't know it was possible for grown men to have that much fun with their pants on." And so I've watched my three boys, and And
they're
it's
laughing their heads off.
amazing how often they are screaming, they are shrieking. I mean, and you might think for a moment like, oh, this is terrible. There's something, it's blood-curdling screams. But then you realize they're shrieking with delight. They're peals of laughter. There's social banter. I mean, sometimes there'll be a bunch of them, cracking jokes, and there's a lot of the play, sort of social play that one would want to see among sort of friends running around the forest or something.
Yeah, that's right.
So I sort of came to the conclusion watching this in the last decade that when video games are played in isolation, it's deeply concerning. But as they have become more social, which I think they have become more social in general, they have become more of a net positive. Would you agree with that or disagree?
No, I would not. I might. There was a period of time when I would have, as I was studying this, but so here's the way to think about it. Because my son, when we let him play Fortnite, it's exactly the same thing. It's they're screaming, talking, cursing. Yeah. So it's very engaging. And in retrospect, I kind of wish my son does resent me for that, because in 6th grade, all the boys were on Fortnite. So had I let him play for an hour or two on Saturdays and Sundays, there would have been no risk. That would have been great. I should have done that. So I can say that, so video games are not necessarily harming most boys. They're a lot of fun. The boys really enjoy them. Very few boys regret the existence of video games. So an hour or two a day on weekends, I think, is perfectly safe. But here's what's not perfectly safe. 3 hours a day, 7 days a week. Because it's perfectly safe to let your kid hang out with friends 3 hours a day, 7 days a week. That would be great. And they would laugh and they would talk, but they would not be constantly getting pulses of dopamine from micro moments of the interaction. Whereas the video games have evolved to get better and better and better at playing the dopamine circuits in the brain, because dopamine doesn't make you satisfied like, oh, that kill was great. Now I can sit back and just savor what that move I just did. No, dopamine says, that was great. Let's do it again. That was great. We want more. And so, as the brain gets stimulated by let's call it fast dopamine or cheap dopamine, just you do something, you get a reward. If you keep that up for hours, the brain compensates, and the way it compensates is by downregulating dopamine neurons, which means it makes them less sensitive to dopamine. So now, as with any addiction, you need more dopamine. You need more to be at the level you were before. And if you do that 3 hours a day, now, of course, a lot of the boys are doing it 5 hours a day. That's really, really bad. Yeah. But even at 3 hours a day, what you're going to find is, sure, your boy's having fun, but when he's not on the game, on average, life will be more boring. Life is unpleasant. I have to get back to the game. So you are changing your son's brain to make it so he doesn't want to engage in the real world. It is not satisfying. The real world is actively boring. Good luck getting him to go to church or synagogue. Good luck getting him to sit in a class. And this, I think, is why our boys are turning into losers, because there are so many things out there. It's not just the video games. Then it's going to be the dating apps, and it's going to be the gambling sites, the sports gambling sites, the crypto betting sites. We have all these gigantic companies aiming their sites at our boys' brains to hook them on quick dopamine. It doesn't help them grow. It blocks their growth, and it also blocks their friendships. You might say, they're laughing with their friends. That makes them closer to their friends. No, the boys' loneliness epidemic got much worse after 2012. And if being connected on multiplayer games was so great for them, they'd be less lonely. But it's not, and they're more lonely. So no, Rufus, I reject your claim.
Okay. We had Dr. Anna Lemke on the show.
Oh, good.
And that her book Dopamine Nation really moved me and helped me understand what's been happening to our kids and to ourselves. And of course there are trends now of intentional dopamine deprivation. But this sense that there's a cost to overstimulating your reward circuitry, and it tends to result in the kind of grumpiness and frustration and eventually depression that we see. One study that you cite in your book, you talk about the importance of synchrony versus asynchronous communications, and there's this wonderful study that you cite that has people listening to music on headphones, I think moving to the same music after, if they're all listening to the same music, at the end of this, when they're given a kind of game to play that measures the trust, where they benefit from trusting one another, people who've listened to the same music synchronously and their bodies have moved in rhythm with one another are more trusting than those who were listening to music that was not synchronized.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So fascinating, because what's happened is just so much of our digital lives, and not just for kids, but for us too, has moved us into an asynchronous rhythm of communication and interaction with the world, right?
That's right. That's right. We have so much evolved circuitry for face-to-face communication. We play off each other. So synchronous communication is generally good. Decades ago, kids made phone calls to each other. Girls would spend a lot of time on the phone. That's good. One-on-one, synchronous. But now they're on group texts and DMs and all sorts of things where it's one broadcasting to 30, and now it's not connecting, it's performing. But more to the point of the study you mentioned, it was a study by Scott Wiltemuth and others at Stanford. And what they did is they had Stanford students listen on headphones to the Canadian national anthem. They wanted something that was kind of thrilling but had no intrinsic meaning. And so they were listening to the Canadian national anthem while swaying back and forth with empty beer mugs in their hand, as though they were in like a beer hall. And the trick is that half of the groups, they were listening to this song at the exact same time, and in half of the groups, they were out of sync. What their hearing was out of sync. So they weren't moving in perfect synchrony. And this is one of the most fascinating things I've ever learned in psychology, that we have this ability to lose ourselves in a group, and that the portal, the way into that, is synchronous movement, marching together in time, dancing, singing in a chorus. I learned this from this amazing book by Barbara Ehrenreich called Dancing in the Streets, A History of Collective Joy. And that brought me to some other books on the subject. But this is something which is obvious to almost all human cultures except for us. Yeah. Now, when we were younger, there were raves that used drugs to foment this state. And people who sing in a chorus still say that they get this. So one of the things I do in the book is I try to say, let's not just look at like social media and phones. Let's look at childhood. What is childhood? Yeah. What is human nature? Yes. How does it grow? How does it develop? Because one of the striking things about children, especially girls, is that girls especially, they're really doing a lot of things, not to compete, not to beat each other, but to sync up. And so all those hand clap games like pat a cake, and you go faster and faster. They're doing it together, but they're doing it in sync, and it's thrilling, and it makes them be closer friends. And girls like jump rope. And it's not the way boys would do jump rope, like really competitive. Yes. It's like we're all getting in sync, and we're singing to the rhythm, and we're moving, and we're singing, and that bonds you together. And so that's what girls need a lot of. Boys too, but girls especially need a lot of that. Yeah. And instead, by age 10, a lot of them are on Instagram. So instead of getting that stuff, they're individual, posting stuff, scrolling. It's asynchronous. It's just not good for them.
Yeah. No, I remember, pat a cake, baker's man, bake me a cake. And I remember being astonished as a child by how quickly the girls could do it. They were just astonishingly fast. And a parent might look at that and say they should be doing their homework, but actually something really important is happening there.
That's right. That's right. Whereas if they can swipe through 1,000 Instagram posts in an hour, that's not impressive, and it's bad for them. That's 1,000 social comparisons, and most of them they're going to fail.
Yeah. And so here's where I might say that when we're engaged in the digital world in a way that does involve synchronous connection with other humans, that's probably better. Right.
Absolutely.
Which is why phone calls are better than sort of quick exchanges of emails and maybe video games that are social, that involve actual conversation and collaboration, are better than social media. I mean, there's an opportunity cost, which ends up being colossal. Like anything that you do, whether it's, watching, college football for 7 hours a day, but, there's an opportunity cost to anything we do extensively, but it feels to me like synchronous digital connection is better. And there is a pathway to, we had your colleague David Chalmers on the show a few times. He talked about his book, Reality Plus, in which he kind of argues that our future in the metaverse might be better than our current reality, which of course, very, very few people see it that way.
In theory,
it may get more synchronous, right? We may become more synchronous in digital space, is my comment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, look, I used to be a techno-optimist. I love technology. Most technology is great. Most technology companies make our lives better. But the promise that we can take basic aspects of human interaction and make them digital and change them radically, and it'll all work out okay. I mean, that's what we heard with social media. Like, oh, well, they're connecting. It's just, this is the way kids connect these days. It's just, this is just what they do. We have to meet them where they are. Like, no, we don't. Like, it turns out that this is really, really bad. And so, sure, the metaverse, I love virtual reality. It's so cool. And the metaverse is really cool. And I don't doubt that there will be meetings like right now, you and I are on Zoom and it's synchronous. But of course, we're not looking right at each other's eyes because we're both looking, a little below the camera. And if you've ever done a Zoom religious service, during COVID, I attended a service at my synagogue. You get the sermon. It's there. The information is there, but it's not at all the same as being in person. And so the promise that the metaverse will make it just like being in person, in theory, that sounds great. I will bet 10 to 1 odds it's not going to work out like that. It's going to be much worse than they're saying. We keep getting promised these amazing technologies that are going to make our lives better. And of course, I'm sorry, a lot of them do make our lives better, but especially for children, that's my main point. Technologies that are beneficial for adults are often disastrous for children because children need struggle and challenge, and they need to grow up in a three-dimensional, five senses world.
This was my conversation with my 13-year-old son, driving him to school this morning.
I think that social media is more of a tool that people can use to interact with each other. And inevitably, if you interact with enough people, you're going to start comparing yourselves to them, which is what a lot of girls and boys do.
Okay, so you're saying we should not demonize the technology. Mm-hmm. The problem is the individuals. Mm-hmm. But don't you think we need to take some actions to try to protect people so people can be happier? We don't want
take away social media, and similar things have happened in every advancement of society, and where more people are connected.
So he goes on to say, when I ask him that he's in 8th grade, he says 98% of his friends have smartphones. Happily, he's at a school that does not permit smartphone usage during the day. But his assessment is that he is happier and his classmates are happier and balanced because of social media. But I was most interested in his comment about, but he hasn't really sampled the alternative as his older brother did, who went to summer camp. But I was particularly interested in his comment about the history. And, we had Yuval Noah Harari on the show recently, who made the point that, hey, the printing press did a lot of horrible things which people don't realize. It resulted in religious wars and witch hunts, but it also made possible large-scale democracies. So every new technology is going to have good and bad impacts, and we need to just figure them out.
Yeah, no, I fully agree, and I fully agree with you. Well, I don't fully agree. I largely agree with your son. But here's one way to think about it. The automobile has brought us tremendous benefits. I like cars. I like driving. And when it came in, a lot of people got killed. And that happened all the way up through the 60s, really high death rates. And so we did two things. We said, one, how about if they have to have seatbelts? And the car manufacturers yelled and screamed, and the government had to compel them. But we said, how about if this thing is killing people, how about you have to have some safety features? Oh, and another thing, how about there's a minimum age to drive? Now, states can decide it, but it's usually going to be 16. What do you think? Would your son say, oh, no, wait, no, you can't take the car away. You can't, no. You have to let everyone drive a car with no safety features. Like, nobody would say that. And so Congress set up this problem in the 90s. They said, how about if no one can sue the social media companies? How about that? Let's do that. Let's put that in law. No one can sue them. How about if they don't have to check ages? So as long as you lie and say you're 13, then they can do whatever they want to you, and your parents can't sue them if you die. That's the situation that Congress created for us. And since then, the number of laws that have been passed to improve safety is zero. Nothing. By the time this comes out, the Kids Online Safety Act might even, no, I hope it'll still be live. It's passed 93-3 in the Senate, huge amounts of support, but Meta and other tech companies might be able to kill it in the House of Representatives. So I would say to your son, you're right about about how we adapt to technology, But one of the ways we adapt is by requiring safety features. And another way we adapt is by having minimum ages. And I hope your son wouldn't say, every 10-year-old needs Instagram. Like, we can't take that away from them. Like, how about just make the age 16 so that nobody's on it until they're 16? Social media is wildly inappropriate for minors. They're talking with strangers. We just found out Snapchat was having hundreds of thousands of cases reported of sextortion, hundreds of thousands each year.
Yeah.
And they say that was a drop in the bucket. So it was probably millions of boys, especially, being sextorted. And we're supposed to just say, oh, well, there's no evidence of harm. It's just correlational.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is a great segue to the solution. So
Okay.
as you say, the big tech companies are culpable, aren't they? I mean, we have
Yes.
pretty clear evidence that they have known what they were doing each step of the way.
That's right. So just to be clear, the tech industry is thousands of companies that make our lives better. And there are really 3 or 4 companies that own our children's childhoods and have complete legal immunity so far and are crushing our kids and know what they're doing and are not taking appropriate steps. And those companies are, first and foremost, Meta, through Instagram primarily. Second is TikTok, which is having a huge impact on kids' attention, ability to attend and focus, as it has so many effects. Third is Snapchat. Snap. Snap is not that it's making kids depressed, but it's exposing kids to sextortion, drug deals, fentanyl poisoning. Again, it's just insane to let 11-year-olds talk to strangers all around the world and buy drugs from them. It's just like, and send naked photos of themselves to them. I mean, this is just unbelievable that this is what we're doing. So it's really those 3 companies in particular that are causing the bulk of the problem. They own most human attention for young people. Now, by most, well, actually, no. Look, half of them, as I said, half of them say they're online almost all the time. A third of them say they're on one of the big 3 platforms almost all the time. So these companies literally own most of the consciousness. They own most of the consciousness of at least a third, possibly a half, of all kids. And they have no duty of care. They can exploit them as much as they want, and they have a legal shield. No other industry has this except for the gun industry. So it's completely insane what's happening, and we've got to change it. We've got to change it fast.
Yeah, yeah. I read once that you spent a day giving talks at Meta about social media's effects on mental health. What kind of response did you get inside the offices of Meta?
Yeah. Well, I know a number of employees, and what I've always said is that these companies are full of good people who used to think that social media was going to bring great good to the world. And we all did 10 years ago.
Yeah.
By 2020, it was looking much darker. I was there like the week, just before COVID came in January. And I gave a talk and I said what I was what I thought was happening. And we had a nice discussion and debate. It was very, very civil. And then I had a conversation with Mark Zuckerberg. He brought up the Orbit and Shabilsky study. He knows the work, especially of Andrew Shabilsky. So he knows the several studies that seem to find no effect. And that's it. And then COVID came in and I haven't spoken to him since then.
Yeah. And last month, Meta launched teen accounts that are designed to protect children's safety. You say you're cautiously optimistic about these accounts. Yeah. Can you tell us how they're different and why they make you hopeful?
Mm-hmm. So first, just to be clear, they only did this because, so let's be clear, they announced this literally the day before the KOSA bill was to be marked up in the House of Representatives. They're doing this to deflect regulatory pressure. That's the only reason. I shouldn't say the only. I mean, look, I think Adam Mosseri I've met him a couple times. I think that if he could protect kids, even with a small cost to Meta, I think that he would do it. So what I'm encouraged, so I'm skeptical and cynical because Meta, what I learned on the Hill, Meta is the primary force that is using these sneaky tactics to try to kill KOSA. They push really bad arguments to people on the left, and a different set of bad arguments to people on the right. None of these are true. So I don't want to give Meta any credit in that sense. But with that foreground, with that preface, the new teen accounts that they announced are the biggest thing I've ever seen them do because it's real. I mean, it's not going to be a total game changer because there still is no age verification. So before you had to lie and say you were 13 in order to get on Instagram. Now you're going to have to lie and say you're 16. But one of the exciting things that it does, in my mind, is it sets 16 as an important age. This is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get people to understand different stages of childhood are different. Middle school is the most vulnerable time. It's insane that 10, 11, and 12-year-olds can open as many Instagram and TikTok accounts as they want. Completely insane. That has to stop. Whereas if you're over 18, fine with me. You do what you want. And so they're saying 16 is at least an age below which there's a major role for parents. So I like that. We're trying to do this around the world, is establish this norm that something about 16, below 16, you're really not ready for social media without your parents' knowledge or permission.
And is 16 kind of an arbitrary line to draw? I mean, some of your critics have said so. Why 16?
Yeah.
Why social media before cigarettes and alcohol?
Right. So, really for health reasons, I would say 21 or even 25, because that's when the brain is done. But, legally at 18, you're an adult unless there's very compelling reasons that you're harming others, which is why we delay, especially alcohol, till 21. 18, it'd be hard to say that you can't do social media as a young adult if you're 18. So really, I would prefer that it was 18. But now, and let's really segue to solutions here. What I've done in the book is, as a social psychologist, I've said, we got into this mess because we all did what everyone else was doing, and we felt we had to do what everyone else was doing. So the way we get out of it is by having clear norms that we all do the same thing. And so I could have tried to push for 18, but I don't think that would fly.
Yeah.
Whereas
part of it's about feasibility. Yeah.
Exactly. So I decided while writing the book that 16 is a reasonable age that we could actually get to. It's after early puberty. So there is some evidence, actually from Andrew Shabilsky and Amy Orman, in fact, that kids are most harmed, or at least the correlations are largest in early puberty. So 16 is after early puberty. It's still within puberty, but it's after early puberty. It's a kind of a clear yet bright line, because that's when you get a driver's license too. So I just said, look, if we're going to have a norm, 16 is the right age for us to shoot for. Right now, it's 13 with no enforcement, which means it's effectively 3. If you're old enough to lie, you're old enough to be on Pornhub. So that's why I say 16. So just to put this, and we're running short on time. So just to clarify, what I did in the book was I said, this is a big, complicated problem. It's full of collective action problems, but we can get out of it with 4 norms. If we can embrace it, not all of us, but a lot of us, or most of us, if we embrace 4 norms, we roll back the phone-based childhood. And they are: no smartphone before high school, or age 14. In Europe, they have a different cutoff for school. But let's just delay smartphones till high school. You can give your middle school kid a flip phone. They're not going to spend 16 hours a day on a flip phone. They're not going to be talking with sextortionists on a flip phone. So no smartphone till high school. No social media till 16, as we were already discussing. It's just wildly inappropriate for children, for minors really, to be talking with strangers, sending naked photos, buying drugs, seeing beheading videos, seeing people being run over by cars, horrible things. So no social media till 16. Phone-free schools. And this is a no-brainer. The teachers have hated the phones forever. Principals hate the phones. It's very hard to teach. Test scores are dropping around the world since 2012. So this is happening at lightning speed around the world, thank God. Phones are
is it making a difference? I think 7 states have banned or restricted cell phones at school. Are we seeing a payoff?
Well, all we have so far are the anecdotal reports, and I can't find any reports of a school that said, "Oh, it's going terribly, we're going to reverse it." I can't find a single report like that. Sometimes they have enforcement problems in the first weeks, that happens, but they almost all say the same thing, which is kids are laughing, they're talking, they're paying more attention in class. So what we do know from the studies of phone-free schools is the vast majority of schools that say they ban phones just mean we have a rule: you can't use your phone during class. But they do, and then they're also on it between classes. So those schools don't necessarily see benefits. But when schools have an effective phone ban, there was one study done by Policy Exchange in the UK, when they have an effective phone ban from bell to bell, then they see improvements in grades, in some academic outcomes, and in some social outcomes. That's the third norm. And then the fourth norm is far more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. Because this isn't just about taking away the phones. This is about restoring a normal, healthy human childhood, a play-based childhood in a three-dimensional world with five senses, using your muscles, moving around in the physical world, getting sunshine in your eyes, touching other kids as you hug or wrestle or walk or talk or laugh. You can't take away touch, laughter, and sunlight from kids and expect them to grow up healthy.
Yeah, you're making me want to go to summer camp. Well, on that note, in our final minutes, I'm interested in it. It seems to me that if there were maybe a fifth recommendation, it might be that we as parents and as adults model the behavior that we hope for our children. And I know that most of us have had our own struggles, right? Our own journeys. Yeah. You say at one point in the book that you have felt overwhelmed personally and perpetually since around 2014. Mm-hmm. How so, and how is your own journey going? And are you taking your own advice?
Yeah. Well, so I've always been, I like to work. I like to read. I've always been busy. But when you're busy, you're sort of working as fast as you can. So go back, 15 years. We had the internet, we had Google, we had word processing. I had a very productive professional life. Now add in, so email now just keeps growing and growing and growing. All your students email you at the drop of a hat, because it's so easy. Now add in texting and group texts. Now add in social media. I was on Twitter. I am on Twitter a little bit, but I use it just as a tool. You add that all in when your consciousness is already full to the brim, and then you add in 3 to 6 hours a day of just like stuff coming in. Cal Newport calls this shallow work. He talks about shallow work versus deep work. Yeah. I used to be able to do a lot more deep work. Now almost all of my day is shallow work. I hate it. We all hate it. We all feel as though it's just too much. There's too much stuff. Heard one guy say, when email came in, it was like, which is easier, sending an email or finding a stamp and a piece of paper and an envelope and going to the post? Like, which is easier? Well, obviously an email. Which is easier, sending 500 emails or sending a letter? It's like, did we really want 500 emails a day?
Right.
So,
Exactly.
So it's just too much. Our neural systems have speed limits, and we're all living way past our neural speed limits. And it's exhausting. It's overwhelming. And I know that makes me more impatient. It makes me a worse person. I don't have time for people. But I do take my own advice a little bit in that, for example, I don't ever look at Twitter on my phone. I really do just use my phone as a Swiss Army knife. Now I'm on my computer all the time, so I have to focus on that. The other thing I do is I make it a point to not check email within the first half hour of waking up. I have coffee. Yeah. I always do some sort of reading of like Stoicism or Buddhism, or I'll meditate, just something to sort of like say, I'm in control of the day. I'm going to start it thoughtfully, and then I'm going to jump into the river of excrement.
Right. Yes. No, I loved Cal Newport's recent book, Slow Productivity, as well as his previous ones, and of course he's has set up something for us to aspire to, which he's completely off of social media, and probably texting. I personally would not take it that far, because I like during COVID I had a number of text threads with good friends emerge that continue to this day that are really enriching intellectually and emotionally. And it strikes me that it is possible to have strong relationships in the physical real world and augment them with digital connection. And this is this strikes me as something that's available to us if we can manage it.
No, I fully agree. And let's just keep in mind, the internet is not social media. If we get rid of social media entirely, if Meta and TikTok were to shut down tomorrow, it's not as though we couldn't find information. We'd still have Google and everything else. It's not as though we couldn't find other people. We'd still have texting and email and FaceTime and Skype and everything else. In the 90s, people found ways to use the internet to create communities. They weren't algorithm-driven for-profit business models that literally rewarded their engineers for increasing time on the site. That's what I'm trying to say.
So
That's what's really doing our kids in. It's not the internet per se. It's this particular advertising-driven business model and all the quick dopamine that they've learned to stimulate in order to keep kids on.
If you could snap your fingers and end all social media, would the world be better without social media?
Oh yeah. I mean, look, I'm sorry, I haven't done the calculation. What I can say is, would life for those under 18 be better? Yes, that I can say. I've done the calculations on that. Life would be much better if they simply didn't have it. And again, half of them say that. Half of them literally say they wish that TikTok was never invented. So I'm confident there. Now, as for whether, obviously social media is very beneficial for many businesses. Could they survive without Instagram? I mean, they were pretty well thriving in the 90s and early 2000s. So I do suspect, and let's just throw in the effects. We haven't even talked about the effects on democracy. So since the hyper-viral
which is the subject of your
media,
next book, I think.
That's right. So once we throw in that hyper-viral social media is very incompatible with the psychological assumptions of the founding fathers. If you read Federalist 10 about the role of passions and people are easily inflamed. And for all these reasons, I do think that social media greatly increases the odds of catastrophic failure, political failure in this country. So if you add that into the mix, I kind of would guess that the world would be better off if it was never invented.
I'm with you. Well, Blaise Pascal wrote, "There's a God-shaped hole in every human heart." You're an atheist, but I think you agree with him.
I do. I've had some spiritual experiences in my life, mostly related to nature and psychedelic drugs, but they are some of the most cherished experiences in my life, and they allowed me to feel the truth of some things I had read in psychology books, in Buddhist philosophy, and so I do value spiritual life. I see it, as a psychologist, I see it as just an aspect of being human, is that you have a spiritual life. Many people believe that we have that because God exists and we miss him or he's our creator. I think something different, but experientially, I have a spiritual life as well. And so, the chapter that I'm proudest of in the book is the one you're talking about, chapter 8. Yeah. As I was almost done with the book, it was all about kids. And then I thought, wait a sec, look, this is happening to all of us. And once I started saying, what is it that's happening to all of us? I reached back to my first book, The Happiness Hypothesis, which was about ancient wisdom. And I realized, everything the ancients told us about how to have a good life, a phone-based life reverses. So, the ancients in so many religions say, be slower to judge, quicker to forgive, don't be angry, be more tolerant, And life on Twitter, or life in a lot of social media is like, judge quick, now, all of us together against him. Because if you don't judge quick, we're going to judge you. Why didn't you judge him? So, and then meditation and mindfulness. I'm really aware of this now. I just have trouble. I can't even meditate anymore. I used to meditate, not a lot, but I have a lot of trouble meditating now. And there's just too much going on. My brain is scrambled. And so if you think about mindfulness, a lot of my students at NYU, they've never been mindful a minute because they always have stuff coming in. They always have the AirPods in. They're always looking at something. They don't have 5 or 10 minutes of just being present. So, over and over again, whatever it is that ancient religious and spiritual authorities tell us we should do, our current lives move us the other way. And I consider that to be spiritual degradation.
Yeah. I love your summary. The beautiful and the sacred and the natural pull us upwards. The phone-based life generally pulls us downwards. So upwards.
Upwards, everyone. I'm not going to say throw your iPhones in the river, but I am going to say try to make your phones and your digital lives be servants of you, and just watch out that the companies are trying to make you servants of them.
Yes, maybe we'll put them in a pouch with a time lock. Well, Jonathan Haidt, thank you so much for being with us today. What a wonderful conversation.
My pleasure, Rufus. Pleasure talking with you and the Next Big Idea Club.